ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
In 2018, Queensland decriminalised abortion for pregnancies up to 22 weeks without a doctor's permission. Now, the prospect of repealing those laws has become a major issue ahead of an election in the state this weekend. In South Australia too, the legality of abortion has been contested in the Parliament. So why is abortion up for debate? Today, Dr. Prudence Flowers from Flinders University on why what's happening here can be linked to the US. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily. Prudence, let's briefly start our discussion in the United States, where abortion has become one of the key issues for the election. So many women would never have imagined that in 2024 there would be such intense debate around this issue.
I think when the US Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022, it sent shockwaves around the world. And, we saw protests throughout capital cities in Australia when that decision fell.
A loud and local response to a decision overseas.
And I think those protests marked this kind of horror at the idea that, a key form of reproductive health care could be taken away because of the political and often religious beliefs of a minority of the population.
Abortion is not a debate. Abortion is healthcare, and healthcare is a human right.
And I think the place of abortion in the current US election signifies the importance of abortion to so many people. It has never been such a key election issue as it is this year. For many people, it's a kind of top 5 issue suddenly because the ability to access reproductive health care is so vital to people's ability to feel safe in their lives.
Okay, so Roe v. Wade, the constitutional right to an abortion, was overturned in 2022 by a conservative US Supreme Court. It had been in place for 50 years. It really sent that decision a message to women around the world, didn't it? That these laws can be unwound.
That they can be unwound and that they can be unwound for what were really overtly partisan political reasons. And that support for abortion is not even that dependent on party identification. So voters tend to support abortion rights. But because abortion had been really politicised, particularly by the Republican Party, this right can be wound back and it can be completely not in keeping with the desires of the public.
All right, so let's now go to Queensland because on the weekend, voters there will be heading to an election and abortion is an issue there too. So to explain what's going on, let's start by talking about the state MP Robbie Katter. Who is he and what's he trying to do?
So Robbie Katter is an independent MP. He represents Katter's Australia Party. He's been in Parliament since about 2012 when he was essentially given the seat, and he is the heir apparent to Bob Katter, who might be more familiar to listeners, and Bob Katter is his father. About 3 weeks out from the election, he announced that if the LNP were elected, which it was widely predicted they would win possibly by a landslide, he would immediately introduce a private member's bill to repeal the abortion decriminalisation law that was passed 6 years ago in 2018.
So the KAP would like to send a strong message to both sides of Parliament that anyone interested in that, we will, quick as you like, put a repeal bill back into the Queensland Parliament. We abide by Christian values. We Judeo-Christian values in the country has been founded on, and we observe those, and we make no apology for that. We're the party that defends and advocates for those rights.
And since then, Robbie Katter has said that he will bring an interim bill to the Parliament first pertaining to late-term abortions. So for Robbie Katter, though, to bring a private member's bill to the Parliament, of course, he'd need majority support. So would he get that? Are we sure he'd get that?
We don't really know what would happen. So the convention is that for matters like abortion, politicians are normally given a conscience vote by their party, by the major parties. Politicians don't vote along party line, they vote along their own personal views or the views of the electorate. At the moment, if Katter is re-elected and the LNP get in, he would have a wealth of LNP politicians who would be keen to vote with him. So the LNP strongly opposed decriminalisation in 2018. It was actually party policy that abortion should remain in the criminal law, and only 3 LNP politicians actually voted in favour of decrim.
So it's likely that MPs would be given a conscience vote, but the Liberal National Party leader David Crisafulli, who according to the polls of course will win on Saturday, he just won't say whether or not he would give members of his party a conscience vote, and he's been asked over and over and over again.
I believe last week he jokingly said that he had been asked 132 times and he still hasn't given a clear answer.
Can you confirm that you have ruled out a conscience vote on termination of pregnancy?
There won't be changes, and I've said that. And I've said that consecutively for a few days. It's not part of our plan. It's not part of our plan. You know our priorities, you know our plan, and it's not part of our plan. It's not part of our plan, and there won't be changes.
Will you stake your leadership
on? I would suggest to you, if there were changes to that, I wouldn't be a very popular person amongst Queenslanders.
So what's happened since Katter made his announcement is, of course, journalists are quizzing Crisafulli about what he would do with his party, and he has insisted that the LNP does not have a plan to revisit abortion. But of course, he doesn't need a plan if Robbie Katter introduces a private member's bill. So it's this very murky terrain, and he is desperately trying not to be pinned down on what, if anything, he would do. But the convention is that he would give his members a conscience vote.
Right, so it's normal for a party to grant a conscience vote on an issue like abortion. And at a Griffith University event last year, David Crisafulli did promise MPs a conscience vote.
If you're asking me about would I ever support recriminalising it, the answer is absolutely no. And I think we, as a society, that's been proven that that's not where Queenslanders are, and indeed Australians. But those issues are a conscience vote, and I will never, ever be the kind of leader that tries to lock people into that.
But Prudence, do we know precisely how many LNP members would vote in favour of this bill if it actually came to the floor of the Parliament?
We don't know the precise number, but for example, Crisafulli voted against decriminalisation in 2018, as did his deputy, Jared Blige. We know that there are multiple new candidates for the LNP who have demonstrable anti-abortion track records, the most prominent of whom is the former Liberal Senator Amanda Stoker, who is a regular speaker at anti-abortion rallies in Brisbane and who's now running for a seat in Queensland.
There is a section of our community that doesn't only not want to hear you, but will actively demonise you for your love and for your respect for the worth of every human being.
There have been reports that some of the new candidates, you know, one of them has a decade-plus history of protesting about abortion with masking tape over her mouth and the word life written on it. Others of them have preferenced an anti-abortion party as second on their how to vote cards. There's an LNP politician who's been recorded telling someone at a pre-poll booth that she can't say anything about abortion essentially until they win the election. And there's multiple sitting members, not new members, who voted against decrim in 2018. There's a very, very strong sentiment within the party that is fanatically anti-abortion, dare I say.
So it sounds like, Prudence, there would be a number of LNP members likely to vote in favour of the Katter bill if it gets up. Although this week, during a debate on Sky News, the Labor Premier, Stephen Miles, really pushed David Crisafulli to outline his views on abortion.
Well, mine's a really simple question, and it can come with a yes or no answer. Do you believe in a woman's right to choose?
It probably won't work for his TikTok, but yes.
Why'd you vote against it? Why'd you vote against it?
My question to you.
So, Prudence, that's what's unfolding in Queensland ahead of this weekend poll. But it's not the only state where the woman's right to an abortion is up for debate. In South Australia last week, abortion laws narrowly escaped changes after an extremely tight vote. In fact, one MP who was having treatment for cancer had to actually race to the parliament to make sure her vote counted.
So Michelle Lensink is the politician in question. She got into an Uber with her son. She'd had chemo that day to travel to Parliament to try and make sure her vote would be counted for the third reading. But just before she needed to come into Parliament, an agreement to pair was made with another politician. So it was this frantic kind of scenes late at night. The Liberal member of the Upper House, Ben Hood, introduced a bill that essentially would have banned abortion after 28 weeks. But rather than just being a traditional abortion ban, the way that his bill was framed was that anyone needing abortion care after 28 weeks would be induced to labour and give birth, and they would have to give birth to a live infant, regardless of the health outcomes for the person giving birth or the infant itself.
We are balancing the rights of a mother to choose a termination and the right of a child past 27 weeks and 6 days to live.
And Ben Hood also made comments that those infants would be just given up for adoption. It seemed like it was essentially a kind of forced birth, forced adoption bill.
And that bill was only voted down 10-9. It was incredibly tight. It relates, of course, to late-term abortions, Prudence, which are pretty uncommon, and you do need 2 doctors to approve that. And, for some women who've been speaking, during this debate, they've really said, it's a life and death situation for them. It's complicated.
I think it's really important to emphasise that anyone who has an abortion after 20 weeks is doing so in complex, often traumatic circumstances, whether that's health circumstances for their in utero infant or personal circumstances that might indicate significant, psychological experiences that they're having relating to things like homelessness or domestic violence. So these are not decisions taken lightly. They're decisions taken to preserve health and to preserve families that already exist. But all of the debate around later abortion, certainly in South Australia, kind of really dismissed those women and framed them in some ways as selfish or casually making the decision, changing their mind at the last minute, none of which is borne out in any of the research around later abortion or in the testimonies that people offer about their experiences.
All right, so Prudence, the bill in South Australia was narrowly defeated, and if the LNP is elected in Queensland this weekend, it's very likely there will be a vote there too. So the question is, why now? Is it a coincidence that 2 states in Australia are debating this as the United States is?
I do think the timing of the South Australian and the Queensland events with the US is connected in some ways. Certainly, I think people like Robbie Katter and Ben Hood are very empowered and emboldened by the example of people like Donald Trump and the success of those kinds of strategies. I think people need to be very, very vigilant about what's going on both at the state level and at the federal level. I think there's been reporting, for example, in both South Australia and Victoria about concerted efforts at the branch level for a kind of religious conservative takeover. In Victoria, there have been recruiting drives specifically targeting conservative Mormon churches and Pentecostal churches, getting them to join Liberal branches, branch stacking essentially. And similar things are happening in South Australia. People need to pay a lot of attention to who's on the ticket, where they're on the ticket, and whether party moderates are essentially being pushed out, because there's not a public appetite for the kind of culture wars politics that dominate the US, but certain conservative politicians in Australia, I think, view it as a way to make their name and establish themselves.
Dr. Prudence Flowers is a senior lecturer in US history at Flinders University. This episode was produced by Sydney Peed and Cara Jensen-McKinnon. Audio production by Sam Dunn. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. Thanks for listening. Hey
Hey, Julia Baird and Jeremy Fernandez here. And this week on Not Stupid, we're talking about royal protocol. Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe made headlines globally when she interrupted the King.
There have been plenty of opinions and a lot of conversation about the role of the monarchy in Australia and when you might use your manners. That's Not Stupid. You can find it on ABC Listen.